All right, welcome back. This is still chapter 1. I will do part 2 and part 3 slides. They're quite a bit shorter than the first part was. So this just shows us we're going to talk about a little about chapter 8. When you read chapter 8, it seems to me to cover a lot of what chapter 1 covers. So we're just looking at, again, the micronutrients that help with fluid balance. We're looking at examples of nutrients for bone health, for blood health, for immune function. We just kind of covered that already. So for this one, we're going to mention that there's basically minerals have, or micronutrients have a functional role in doing one of these 6 things. They may be enzymes that help reactions to move quickly. They might be a coenzyme that actually attaches to an enzyme to enable the enzyme to work, or a cofactor, which is similar, that has to be used along with an enzyme. So these are all part of reactions in the body. And that's what these micronutrients are important for. They also are important for fluid and electrolyte balance, as we mentioned in the last part, that without electrolytes, we would be dehydrated. We have to have sufficient amount. We'd also be very dizzy. If you don't have enough fluid in your ear, you become very dizzy. So you have to have a sufficient amount of electrolytes. Antioxidant systems we mentioned that will help with cancer prevention and keep our cells healthy. Building bones, energy metabolism, blood health. Those are the main functions for the micronutrients. So that's what we're covering throughout the semester. Another section back to chapter 1, so that was pretty much it for chapter 8, is that we're talking about energy as calories. So we're always talking about how many calories you've had and how much should we eat, how much should we not eat. So a calorie, remember that with food, we're not really talking about calories. We're always referring to kilocalories, even though we don't use kcals very often. But usually we use either kcal or capital C for calorie. When it's capitalized, that's the same as a kilocalorie. So 1 calorie is quite a very small amount of energy. So that's why we usually talk about 1,000 calories or a kilocalorie at one time. So a calorie is the energy that we derive from those micronutrients, and generally it means the heat that it takes to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. But because that's a very small amount of energy, we'd be talking about a hamburger, instead of being 400 calories, being 4,000 calories. So it's kind of like, talking in pennies or dollars. It's a lot easier to talk about, I have $10 and I have 10,000 pennies. So that's why it's easier to use kilocalories. So there's another little TED Ed video about what calories are. There's no questions associated with that in this, like there was last time. So we're going to review calories, and then we'll calculate calories so that you can easily find, if you have a label, for instance, for food, there's no labels on a hamburger at McDonald's, but it does tell you the total calories. But if you happen to know that this hamburger had 46 grams of carb, 14 grams of fat, and 45 grams of protein, you can easily determine the calories. So you can see how they do the label computation. So and the reason you know this is because every gram of carbohydrate is 4 calories. The same with protein. Every gram of protein, 4 calories. Fat's more than twice. Alcohol's almost twice that of protein and carbohydrate. So as long as you know these numbers, 4, 9, 4, you can calculate the calories because there's no calories in vitamins and minerals. So this hamburger came out to 490 calories. You simply take the grams times the calories per gram. That deletes the grams, and then you end up with just calories. So here's another example of a calculation of a nutrition label. So that's what they did. So you see a nutrition label, you see the total calories is 80. How did they get that? Well, there's 1 gram of fat. That's 9 calories. There is 15 grams of carbohydrate. That's 15 times 4. That's 60 calories. And then there's the protein, which is 4 times, where's the protein? 4 times the number of grams of protein. So that came out to be about 80. We got 81, so it's 80 calories. They rounded it to 80. So that's how they determine the calories in a food product. And then lastly, that we'll just look a little bit about how do we choose when we're looking at nutrition information, how do we know the information we're receiving is viable? Is it really something we can trust? So we have to make sure we understand the types of experiments that are used to determine the results that we see in the news. So there's usually, two types we can look at, either observational or experimental. So when you do an experimental experiment, usually you're using an animal or human subjects, and usually they're randomly controlled, so that you just put a random number of people in a pot, you pick them out, and there's no selection. If it's a double-blind, random clinical trial, that means the investigator also does not know who it is that's, getting the change or not getting the change. So these are the best type of experiments, although you can't always use them because you can't make somebody take something that would harm them. So that's when you use observational experiments, because then you're taking people and observing what they're already doing without giving them harmful things in their diet. So there's another really good video here that I love, TED Ed, that has a good explanation of what the two types of studies are and why they're used. So that would be helpful for you, because when you look at studies, which we will when you're doing your research, you want to see, like, did they have 5 subjects or do they have 5,000 subjects? What's going to make it really valuable data at the end? Because you can't, small subject size, not randomizing, selecting, not having it double blind can make the results skewed. So that's the part 2. And the last part of the slides, part 3, this one's more general. We're just going to look here at, we're looking at the health of our country. What is the current state of health in America or in the U.S.? And what can we expect from a healthy lifestyle or not? And what can you do as a college student to have good nutrition? So here we're just going to mention that, obesity has been a problem more recently. It's not something that was a problem 100 years ago. Just looking at 1892, very, very low incidence of obesity. Lifespan was more like 40, 45. Now it's closer to 75. But as we get more economically stable, there's more food and there's more obesity. What's causing the obesity? What's all of our calories coming from? Largely processed foods, very little plant foods, and 25% animal food. So we're getting a lot of animal foods tend to be higher in fat, so there's a higher calorie content, but really it's the processed foods that are refined sugars, refined flours, that is our biggest calorie consumption. And then just looking at the comparison where we're getting, the goal for protein is about 10 to 35% of our calories. So we're pretty good with our, people tend to get plenty of protein. Carbs, we're actually getting about the right amount, and fat, we're on a little bit on the high end. These are just goals that the government has set to be considered healthy goals. They call it the Healthy People 2020 goals. And the goal is by 2020 that we can attain a higher quality, longer lives, free of injury and preventable disease. These are just goals that are set every 5 years to try to aim at, so that all the health professions can have a single focus. So, for instance, the report issued in 2010 was, you can find online under Healthy People, but there really wasn't, it doesn't seem like we're ever meeting the goals. They're always a little higher than what we can deal with. So the report, you can look state by state. Here's a report from Indiana in 2016. So they're looking at leading causes of death in that state. So every state keeps data and keeps track, just like the CDC keeps tracks of the whole United States. Each state has a health department that keeps. So this state, there's quite a bit, 25% of the diseases were heart disease, and about the same for cancer. So cancer and heart disease are still two of the highest incidences of illness. So in order to maintain a healthy lifestyle, we need to consume nutrient-dense foods, which we'll talk about, and limit solid fats, cholesterol, added sugars, sodium, and alcohol, and limit the intake of calories just to meet needs. So those are the main goals to try to maintain health. And then for a healthy lifestyle, what kind of activity? Well, we need to add activity to that lifestyle, not just eating, but also activity. So these are the things that we're focusing on, and you'll see a few more slides in this section. All right, so look through the slides and do the quizzes and the homework, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.